The following is an EWTN special presentation.
And I think it's now my pleasure to introduce myself. I will just say very, very quickly that the talk I'm about to give here is based on a book I just wrote and that Bishop Barron referred to, The Soul's Upward Yearning. And it's part of a four-part trilogy, again, shameless advertising, that is published by Ignatius Press, which you might be able to get from their table. But in any case, this is based on The Soul's Upward Yearning. It's a different kind of talk than I have given before. By the way, I'm qualified to speak about this, so that's my introduction. So, and it's a different kind of talk. It's we're dealing in an age of materialism. And believe me, as we have just heard from two different speakers, our young people are really, almost convinced that, the soul is a non-existent part of their being. It's kind of like one of these fables from times gone by. They've learned from their biology classes that we're just a group of atoms and molecules. And of course, because of that, and not knowing anything else, not seeing the evidence, they basically fall into a trap of almost living metaphysical materialism, which of course leads to a kind of ethical materialism. So this is an attempt to restore the soul in a few easy lessons. But here we go. I'm going to start with a little bit of a puzzler. And the puzzle is this. For a long time, we have heard that human beings have evolved over the course of time, and this evolution was principally a biological or organic evolution. And certainly part of it was, no question about it. There is a traceable movement from Homo habilis to Homo erectus to Homo sapiens to Homo sapien neanderthalensis to Homo sapiens sapiens, and even to mitochondrial Eve and Y chromosome Adam 200,000 years ago, who are the patrilineal and matrilineal heritage or ancestors that we have to this very day. Every single person in this room has mitochondrial DNA from our first woman ancestor, mitochondrial Eve, and every man in this room has a vestige of Y chromosome Adam in the Y chromosomes that they have. No question about that. There was definitely an organic progression. There was definitely an organic, physical, biological evolution that took place. But as Pope Pius XII told us in 1951 in the great encyclical Humani Generis, that's not all there is to the story. A pure physical or organic evolution is only 1/10 of the truth, because God has given every single human being an individual and unique transphysical soul. Something that's not reducible to physics, something not reducible to a physical evolutionary process, something which can come from the transphysical being God alone. And of course, we take that as a matter of faith as Catholics. We take it as a matter of faith because Jesus has preached our imminent resurrection. We take it as a matter of faith that we are not merely material organic beings, that we do have some transphysical aspect to us. And that needs to be brought to the attention of our kids so that they will learn not only to live for eternal life, though that's very important, but to know also that they have transcendent qualities, that they are made, as all three of our speakers have intimated today, in the very image and likeness of God. Of course, very clear in Dr. Scott Honstock and Bishop Barron's talk. The main thing, though, is kids look at it, they go to their biology class, they have no defense, they have no evidence, and they just go, oh, I don't know about this, Don't make me defend this in front of my friends. I'll be the laughing stock. They don't have to defend it in front of their friends by denying organic and physical evolution. They don't. All Catholics, as Pope Pius XII said in 1951, are free to believe in organic or physical evolution to the extent that science has manifested its truth. And even Pope St. John Paul II has clearly manifested too that evolution has become more than a hypothesis or theory. It's turning into a very credible theory in light of the genetic and fossil evidence. But that is not what we're about. We're about defending the soul, the transphysical soul, the transcendental soul in a culture that doesn't really want to acknowledge it, almost the heel marks going across the carpet, attempting to deny it in this materialism, which is no longer closet, it's overt, particularly in a lot of science classrooms, even though a lot of real scientists do not believe in that materialism. Let me just talk about a few interesting things and start with this one little puzzle. And that is, there's a brand new book that's just come out from probably the number one linguistic theorist in the country, a fellow by the name of Noam Chomsky, and an MIT professor of biology and physical evolution, and his name is Robert Berwick. And they just published a book in MIT Press in 2016. The book is called Why Only Us? And in it, they discuss a variety of things, and I don't want to get into the complications of this because you have endured much today already. The point I really want to say, though, is what they have discovered is that 70,000 years ago, it seems highly likely that an event happened. Now, this event 70,000 years ago is significant because mitochondrial Eve and Y chromosome Adam were 200,000 years ago, and that is to say 130,000 years earlier than this event. But what was the event? It was an explosion of communication. It's what Noam Chomsky calls a universal grammar. Something happened where, now this is Chomsky's interpretation, where the brains of, Homo sapiens sapiens that shared this mitochondrial DNA from, Eve and Adam, that the brains of these Homo sapiens are so rewired. I mean, they're like layered. They're like layered upon layers so that they can get higher viewpoints amidst higher viewpoints and so grasp basic syntactical references. Now, syntax, you might think, well, that's just obvious. Anybody can do. Well, any child can do that. But no primate can do that. Primates like Nim Chimpsky, named after, of course, Noam Chomsky. I mean, a very, very remarkable chimpanzee was taught 160 American sign words, right? You can sign American sign words for 160 words. We'll talk about what kind of words they were. They're individual words like banana, tree, man, etc., where you have what's called a specific sensorial reference. But nevertheless, that's pretty good. But Nim and Washu and so many others couldn't do one little thing that every child of two gets: the difference between dog bites man and man bites dog. The child laughs at the proposition, knowing man bites dog doesn't make any sense. But the chimpanzee doesn't get it, can't get it, can't differentiate between subject and object, can't differentiate between subject and predicate, just can't get the most elementary form of syntax. But 70,000 years ago, Human beings' brains are so completely rewired, according to Chomsky. I'm going to suggest it's not just their brains that were rewired. They got a soul. Hold on to that for a moment. But for the moment, 70,000 years ago, a whole group of, essentially, there's a couple, essentially, that gets it and develops into a group of people that shared the lineage of whoever this was, right? They get what's called this universal grammar, this ability not only to understand elementary syntax, but actually complex syntax. They're able to understand, and differentiate between like verbs and imperative kinds of verbs and past tenses and future tenses. They're able to know the difference between, cases, the accusative case and the genitive case and so forth and so on, right? So they're able not only to grasp, of course, they might not know the parts of speech, but they know how to use the parts of speech. And there are a lot of them, not just subjects and predicates and subjects and objects. There's a whole lot of them. And of course, look at how children can actually begin to utilize, this grammar, this syntax that we have. I mean, it's absolutely remarkable in very, very sophisticated ways, to be utterly manipulative if they would like. But the key thing that's important is that no other primate, no matter how sophisticated, has ever been able to cross the syntax threshold according to the studies of Noam Chomsky, Herbert Terrace, and a variety of others. We are so fundamentally different. We're not just different in understanding elementary syntax. You'll see in a moment, we're different in 10 huge mega areas that in no way any primate has been able to cross that threshold into. How did it happen? Well, I mean, I got to admit, Noam Chomsky, he's kind of trying to protect the materialistic side of things. He thinks it's a brain rewiring. But do you have any idea how complex that brain rewiring would have to be so that the universal grammar that enables us to understand the most complex forms of syntax can be done by a child? I can take a 3-year-old in China and bring him over to Africa, and the 3-year-old in China will learn the entire language that is given to him in Africa, right? And he'll learn it, syntax and complex syntax and all. You just tell me how there can be a universal grammar. You tell me how the brain got so complexly rewired that we can do things on all kinds of complex levels, that a primate that has very, very decent cranial capacity can memorize 120, some say 180 American Sign Language words, and they can't even get it. You tell me, why only us? Is it just the brain rewiring? If it is the brain rewiring, how did it happen so fast? And why did it happen universally? You tell me how that happened. I got to tell you, is it a genetic switch? Well, if it is a genetic switch, let me tell you, it's a really complicated genetic switch with a program I can't even begin to possibly understand because of its interstices of layers upon layers of different, reformulating differentiated expressions into similitudes. I mean, this is really complex stuff. What genetic switch? What are you talking about? A natural cause? Are you kidding me? I mean, do you know the odds against this? Back to monkeys typing Shakespeare. The main thing is something very, very strange going on here. Something very strange went and happened 70,000 years ago. Something very strange is happening in little children that's not happening elsewhere. And my proposal to you is, it's the very thing that Pope Pius XII talked about a long time ago. I think what he was talking about was they're given a soul. And it's this soul that has some remarkable powers. And I'm going to just talk about the difference between perceptual ideas and conceptual ideas in just a moment. But this is remarkable, the powers of our soul. I mean, I hope after this talk you never underestimate your mystery again, and you never doubt that you were made in the image and likeness of God. But that's not all that happened 70,000 years ago. 10,000 years later, because human beings had this remarkable communications ability, had this remarkable ability to actually differentiate, use syntax, make complex statements, say things emotively. They could learn everyone else's language simply because, right, it's a universal grammar upon which language is based. Because they had all that, they start migrating out of Africa. So, between 200,000 years to 70,000 years before this event happens, right, this explosive communications moment happened, right? They all hung around the border between Namibia and Angola. Maybe they got a couple of 100 miles north and south of that border between Namibia and Angola. That's where, mitochondrial Eve and Y chromosome Adam were from. And of course, not much happened. Then comes the 70,000-year communication explosion. And all of a sudden, this communications ability, this syntax, this ability to process data intellectually, this gift of what I'm going to call later conceptual ideas, and all of a sudden they're exploring. They're literally 10,000 years later, they're crossing out of Africa. They're going into the Middle East, right? From the Middle East, they're going to go, east toward China. They're going to go west toward Europe. And if that weren't enough, they're going to go to the very northernmost parts of Europe and Russia. They're going to cross the Arctic Bridge. They're going to go over to the New World. They're going to come, and in 1,000 years, they're going to move from the Arctic Bridge. There was a kind of a land bridge going when the Arctic seas were very low. From moving across that Arctic Bridge into the New World, they're going to go all the way to the southernmost tip of South America in 1,000 years. There's creativity going on there, exploration, a sense of adventure. Something else was happening too. It wasn't just this. It was also, they started burying their dead. And they started making religious rituals and religious symbols. So in 60,000 years ago, all of a sudden, religion, which was never an interest to a primate, all of a sudden becomes a deep interest to this new, I'm going to call it, this new breed of humanity. All of a sudden, they start, thinking about the spirit world. They start thinking about, the idea of a god or gods. They start symbolizing their sense of the sacred and their sense of the numinous. And then something else begins to happen to them, right? They all of a sudden, they start getting an interest in counting and numeration and economy and exchange and building things with the newfound numeration in mathematics that they have. There's no primate with abstract mathematics, I'm sorry to tell you. It just doesn't exist. But this group of human beings, they not only move into communication, they start becoming intensely interested in mathematics and developing it at lightning speed. I mean, geometrical considerations, not quite algebraic considerations at this moment, right? But certainly numeric and simple algorithmic expressions become part and parcel of economy and building, in the most ancient of cultures. But something else even begins to happen. They start getting interested in social organization. Communications are rife, so they become interested in social organization. They start becoming interested in law and in founding civil society and even in founding a state and kingdoms. We are strange. We are unique. I asked the question of Chomsky and Berwick, why only us? Why is it that when there's no evident genetic reason, no evident physical reason, right? I mean, it's a group of Homo sapiens. They got a lot of cranial capacity. But there's one group of Homo sapiens, or Homo sapiens sapiens, that suddenly begins to emerge with this remarkable talent. It's not linked to their brain capacity. It's linked, yes, to the capacity for linguistic expression in their brains, an incredibly complicated pattern that we still don't completely understand. And of course, to the creativity necessary for mathematics, the creativity necessary for economy and building and law and society. And in addition to that, the beautiful numeration and finally algebraic expression of mathematics. Why only us? Here's my solution. Let me start with something easy. Have I just lost everybody? Okay. All right, good. I mean, why only us? Let's go back to the question. And I'm going to advocate that we have a transcendent soul, and that transcendent soul gives us what I'm going to call 10 capacities. We're not going to go through all 10 capacities today, but the transcendent soul does give us 10 capacities that cannot be produced by physical processes and physical systems. And now we are getting very good contemporary philosophical and scientific evidence to back this up. But I want to start with something kind of evident. And the evident thing is, I think we have a soul, and I think we have plenty of evidence for the existence of that soul, that transphysical soul, which is going to survive bodily death. Some of you have heard me talk about near-death experiences before. Just give me 5 minutes. I think I can get you the major explanation of this. Essentially, what's going on, there are several major medical studies of near-death experiences. Frankly, I think some of these wonderful stories that have been given, heaven is for real, are delightful and wonderful and true. However, my one thought is, because there are people out there or groups out there who use near-death experiences to kind of, propagate a false religion, do not go with the stories in general. Go with the scientific studies. So go with this wonderful study done by Samuel Parnia and his 10 colleagues at the University of Southampton in 2014. 2,060 individuals were studied. Go with the Pim von Lommel study, 11 hospitals in Europe over a 5-year period, hundreds of patients in 2001. Go with the study of Dr. Kenneth Ring of blind people. Hold on, I'll talk about that. Blind people during death. And finally, go with Dr. Janice Holden's, thank you, Dr. Janice Holden's study where she puts together 39 veridical studies together. These are solid studies with the adequate kinds of procedures in them to make sure that any skewing that takes place can be accounted for by statistics and probability. So what do these studies find? These studies find that in 85% of children who experience clinical death, and about 20% of adults that experience clinical death, they find that these people, they leave their bodies. Some kind of transphysical form, soul, leaves their bodies. And they kind of have this sense that they're going through a tunnel. They come out on the other end, and they're looking at their physical bodies from on high above and sort of at an angle. They're looking at their physical bodies down below. Many of them are in an operating room and so forth. And notice that they can see, they can hear, they can remember all of their past memories, recall all of their past memories. They can remember what's going on with them there so they can take it back, when they're resuscitated. Right? So during the time of their clinical death is flat EEG, right? So no electrical activity in the cerebral cortex, fixed and dilated pupils, no gag reflex, essentially very, very little electrical activity in the brain, and a few sputterings of neurons somewhere, in the lower brain, nothing going on, that would give rise to cognitional activity or visual activity or auditory activity in the higher brain. I mean, we're talking pretty much dead array. Now, I mean, the key, I'm using that precise medical terminology. Now, the one thing that's key is when the person is out of their body, they can actually report veridical data that's taking place. And this is what these studies, these 4 studies I just pointed out to you, that's what they're looking at. They're trying to test the veracity of this veridical data. Veridical data just simply means unusual data that couldn't have really been predicted. And of course, somebody gives this data as having taken place when they were clinically dead, and an external, independent researcher can actually verify it. So, we're not talking here about, I saw the doctors resuscitating me. Not unusual. You can't use the data. But I did pass through the hospital walls, and on the 3rd floor, I saw outside of the hospital a sneaker out on the ledge that had been out there for a long, long time with a worn left toe, and the shoelace is stuck under its heel. One of Melvin Morse's colleagues goes out, crawls literally out on the ledge, and there it is, exactly as described. Go figure, I don't know. I mean, this is hard to figure. Mr. So-and-so, we lost your dentures. Yes, but I know where they are. You do? Oh, yes. The nurse with the red hair grabbed them out of my mouth before the resuscitation attempt, opened this drawer underneath a machine that looks just like this, threw it in the drawer, slammed it, and if you look for a machine that looks like this and look in the drawer, my dentures are going to be there. And sure enough, they are, right? I mean, we literally have hundreds of these unusual cases, right? I passed through the walls into the waiting room where my brother and his friend were waiting next door, and they were talking badly about me, and he was wearing my T-shirt, "Never speak badly of the dead," because of course, right, they may be listening. So, of course, the key thing, of course, is he reports the entire conversation to the brother whose jaw is dropping. Now, we have hundreds of these vertical data, and that's what Janice Holden put together in the study of 39 studies. So it's like a super study of 39 other vertical studies. But I think the second area that really just gets you is 80% of, this is very relevant to me, 80% of blind people see during clinical death. And these are mostly people who are blind from birth. Now, why is that relevant? Because a lot of materialists try to say, oh no, this is just a projection. This is just a hallucination. Your brain is just projecting something, right? Is sort of making up something, right? And projecting it onto reality. It just so happens that the tennis shoe was out there. Not. But anyway, let's suppose we believe this. It doesn't work for blind people. If you've never had a visual image in your life, how in the world is your physical brain going to project a visual image during your clinical death if you don't have a body, a transphysical body that left your physical body and is looking at the whole thing through transphysical eyes? I don't know, and I've never seen anyone be able to explain it. This is a very important datum, and it's not just any percent. It's 80% of blind people. That's a lot of blind people. I mean, what's my point I'm trying to get to? I think it is highly, highly probable that we do have a transphysical body which will survive bodily death. It just doesn't stay in the operating room. It frequently is transported to another domain which people identify as heaven. When they get to heaven, they see this white light, which is an intensely loving white light, who they identify as either Jesus or identify as God. Little children frequently, 85% of them who undergo clinical death have a near-death experience, and they frequently see Jesus when they are clinically dead. And a lot of people, a high percentage, see deceased relatives, sometimes deceased friends, but most of the time deceased relatives who come and talk to them about the decision either to go back or to come forward. Now, of course, we didn't get any people back here who made the decision to go forward, but they were given an option. So, exactly. But the go-back people said they were given an option, or at least a discussion point. Now, here's the deal. The deal is there's something here that needs accounting for. If you want to read a really good book by a good neuroscientist, his name is Dr. Mario Beauregard at Arizona State University, fine neuroscientist, read the book Brain Wars. It's right. This is the clash between the materialists and the transcendentalists, the transphysicalists, and that, I think, is a very good book because he just takes all the arguments to the contrary with Dr. Pim van Lommel and others, and a series of other people, and just literally explains every single one of them, or I should say trashes, really, those arguments, which are really, really facile arguments. Like I said, nobody can figure out why a blind person can, quote unquote, hallucinate a visual image when they never saw one. You know, hello. Okay, now, let's go to the second point. But, I mean, here's my point. There's some evidence here for kids, and it gets them thinking, and it should be presented to them. They're not just living here in this world. They're not just a clump of atoms. There's a whole lot of good veridical studies, medical studies, peer-reviewed journals of medicine studies, right, that are already verifying the existence of a transphysical soul. It's got to be dealt with. Let's take a look at a second thing that we as Catholics have had this in our quiver of arrows for a long, long time. We borrowed it, by the way, shamelessly from Plato, and of course, since that time, from Aristotle as well. The key thing about this, they're called 5 transcendental desires, but it's really in Plato. Plato talks about these 5 transcendental desires, and it's Augustine, St. Augustine, who sees these 5 transcendental desires and runs with them and makes them a part of Christian Neoplatonism, but they are still as valid today as they were back when Augustine took these things to task. So what are the 5 transcendental desires? The desire for perfect truth. Now, if you want this articulated in the most formidably contemporary mathematical and linguistic way, you've got to read Bernard Lonergan's book called Insight, A Study of Human Understanding, which is, of course, about the desire for unrestricted and perfect truth. And I'll tell you the solution in a moment. Now, it is about a 1,000-page book with a lot of complications and equations. However, that'll establish the case just fine for any kid of analytical disposition who says, I don't want to believe in this. Just hand them Lonergan's book and say, figure this out. You know, I'm telling you. This is going to it could change my mind. I was a sophomore in college. Just hit me right up against the head. Second thing, the desire for perfect love, right? And the third thing, the desire for perfect justice and goodness. The fourth thing, the desire for perfect beauty. The fifth thing, what I'm going to call the desire for perfect home. Plotinus and others called it perfect being, but I'm going to call it perfect home. That's what we're yearning for. That's where the desire comes in. And here's the basic deal. I'm going to give you the basic argument, that St. Augustine or Plato would have, and I still think it's a completely valid argument today. Look, if we have a desire for perfect truth, then how do we know this? Well, first of all, we do want to know the complete set of correct answers to the complete set of questions until we're jaded, right? My little nieces, they'll come up to me and go, Uncle Bobby, why is this? I go, oh, because of this. Well, why is that? Well, because of that. And why is this? And finally, I've got to go, time out. We're in the deepest modes of quantum physics, and they're never going to stop because, of course, they're like little exoset missiles. They will keep asking questions until they get the complete set of correct answers to the complete set of questions. But there's another way of knowing it. And here it is, everyone. We notice every imperfection in our knowledge. We know when we have not got the complete set of correct answers to the complete set of questions. We know when there is imperfection in the truth that we know. We know that there is more to be known, and we even know where to look to find what we do not know. And it's this very quality that Plato and Augustine are saying, hey, how can we do this? How can we know every imperfection in truth, every imperfection in our knowledge, that there's more to be known, and every time we turn around, such that we always ask another question, what is it, why is it, and how is it, and so forth? Why? Why? Because we must have, said St. Augustine and Plato, we must have some sense of what perfect truth is like. If we didn't have any sense of what perfect truth is like, we'd never have any point of comparison to know we don't have perfect truth yet. And if we didn't have any sense that we don't have perfect truth yet, that our truth and our knowledge is imperfect, we'll never ask any question at all. The question derives from this desire to know everything about everything. And we have to have some sense of what it would be like. But if we didn't have that, we'd never ask a question. I mean, the apple would have dropped on Newton's head. He would have looked at it like a cow and eaten it. I mean, that's it. No law of gravity. It would have been bad. The point, of course, I'm trying to get to is, here is the turning point. If you believe, and by the way, it's not just St. Augustine, right? We're talking about Sir John Eccles, the great Nobel Prize-winning, anatomist and physiologist, right? This is a great man who also had a PhD in philosophy. He was no dummy. We're talking about Bernard Lonergan, right? The great philosopher, the transcendental philosopher, in my view, in the 20th century, in terms of a defense of the transcendental position. We're talking about people like Michael Polanyi, who was cited by Robbie George just the other day, the great chemist Michael Polanyi, right? This, could have been a Nobel Prize winner, one of the most influential chemists and philosophers in history. We're not talking about idiots. We're talking about people who have really thought about this, and they're perplexed. How did I ever get some sense of what perfect truth would be like, such that I could recognize every imperfection in truth and ask questions continuously until I get to the point of perfect truth? Where could I have ever gotten it from? Answer from Plato, still valid today. Answer from Thomas Aquinas, still valid today. The cause has to be commensurate with its effect. If you have a sense of perfect truth, then you must have gotten that sense or tacit awareness of perfect truth from perfect truth itself, complete intelligibility itself, or what Lonergan would call an unrestricted act of thinking itself, or what Eccles would call an unrestricted act of mentation or mind itself. That's what I'm saying. Well, what do you mean an unrestricted act of thinking? God. That's what I mean. Now, I can prove that, by the way. You can only have one unrestricted thing, too much for today. But the main thing right now is this. That one unrestricted act of thinking is present to every single one of us tacitly, which is the reason why we are curious, the reason why we're indefinitely going to ask questions until we come to a knowledge of complete intelligibility, the complete set of correct answers to the complete set of questions. I mean, it's in us. It's driving us. We recognize imperfection. We want to overcome it. Same thing holds true with love. We have a desire for perfect love. I do this round and round and round again with my students who always tell me, something, I don't want perfect love. Great, so you never had a girlfriend, right? And the girlfriend just never lived up to expectations, right? And she wasn't perfect, true. She wasn't perfect home for you, not perfect meaning in life. She wasn't perfectly understanding. She wasn't perfectly responsive. She was finite, and restricted. And then she even got tired and did physical things. And then you said to yourself, she's not the one. I said, what are you looking for? And they go, well, what do you mean what am I looking for? What are you trying to extract out of that poor girl? Perfect love? You got it. Except you're looking for perfect love in all the wrong cases. But my point is, in all the wrong places. My point is, We desire perfect love. Same thing with, by the way, you have the capacity to recognize every imperfection in love in everybody around you and every imperfection in love in yourself. Oh, yes, you do. All you have to do is give it a chance. Give a 2-year-old a chance to look in your eyes, and they'll figure out whether you're authentic or inauthentic in your love in 2.5 seconds. They know the difference. I only ask why. Why do you want perfect love? How do you do that? Unless the cause being commensurate with the effect, perfect love itself is present to your consciousness, engendering the desire for ever more perfect love. But we have to find it in all the right places, namely the perfectly loving God himself. The same thing with justice. I don't have to tell you, right? I mean, we do have a desire for perfect fairness or justice. Every kid has a desire for perfect. You don't train your kids to have a perfect desire for fairness or justice. If he did, he'd turn it on you. But as it turns out, he is or she is going to turn it on you anyway. Mom, that's not fair. Dad, that's not. And they know, oh gosh, they know they're in the rights. But how do they know? But of course, later on, they want a perfectly fair education system, a perfectly fair governmental system, a perfectly fair judicial system. I would love a perfectly fair all of the above. And we get so frustrated when we don't get it. But how do we recognize imperfections in fairness or justice indefinitely in every institution, in every person, including ourselves, indefinitely, unless we have some sense of what perfect fairness or justice would be like? And where did you get that from? Perfect justice or fairness itself, present to your consciousness. And the same thing with perfect beauty, and the same thing with perfect home. So what's my point? My point is, God is present to us. God's perfectly true, or I should say perfectly intelligible, perfect mentative state, unrestricted, perfect love, perfect goodness or fairness, justice, perfect beauty, majesty, and awe, perfect home, and complete erasure of alienation is present to us. And we recognize every imperfection until we get to him. This is why Augustine begins the Confessions with what great line? For thou hast made us for thyself, and our hearts are restless until they rest in thee. Why? We're made for perfect truth, perfect love, perfect justice / goodness, perfect beauty, and perfect home. And our hearts are going to be restless, and that's only in God. And God is present to us, engendering those very desires, those very transcendental kinds of awareness. And that's what makes us transcendental. That's why 70,000 years ago, all of a sudden, a whole group of Homo sapiens suddenly becomes interested in religion, suddenly becomes interested in a justice system, suddenly becomes interested in getting judges over themselves and mediators and tribal people who are going to, witch doctors, going to mediate justice. That they're looking for greater forms of love and authenticity that are going to give rise to legal codes. They become interested in religious symbols and in sacred symbols because they've got these 5 transcendental desires which come literally from God himself, present to us, driving us to us until we are satisfied in him alone. We're transcendental beings. And if we as Christians have such an ability to articulate it, not just with religious, well, Michael Polanyi was a religious person, then John Eccles turned out to be a religious person, Bernard Lonergan is a religious person, but nevertheless, true good scientists and philosophers who are doing this on an objective basis, I'll tell you this right now, we should never give it up. We're transcendental beings. We not only have a transphysical soul capable of surviving bodily death, we also have the transcendental desire. Let me go to a third thing real quick. And that is the difference between perceptual ideas and conceptual ideas. I don't have a huge amount of time, I know that, but I want to just get this point out because it's so germane to the question, why only us, that Chomsky and Berwick have posed. And here it is. Perceptual ideas are ideas that come from singular images or a symbol of a singular image, right? So you put a picture of a banana, right, on a placard or something, and you say, use the sign language for banana, and the chimpanzee will get it, right? And then you put a tree on there, a symbol of a tree, and the chimpanzee's going to get it. And then you put a lion on there, and the chimpanzee's going to get it. And you can do this like for 180 individuated symbols of individuated things. Now, listen to the sentence I just gave you. Now, you put it on a placard that has 180 individuated symbols with 180 individuated things. How many of those words had an individuated symbol that you could reduce it to? The word how? Would somebody please point to a how? Many? Would somebody please point to the image, the symbol, the individuated image for the many of these? These? Where's the these? Right? Images have a sensorial correlate that can be pointed to. To? Where's a to? I mean, you kidding me? 95% of the words we have are not perceptual ideas. They're not reducible to symbols of individuated images at all. They're a whole different category of words, which, by the way, the great Plato, Aristotle, and St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas recognized a long time ago. They're conceptual ideas. And conceptual ideas come from what we're going to call heuristic notions in just a moment. Conceptual ideas are relational ideas. That's where I relate things to other things. So I start then, not just by having individual things. Well, I start with individual things. Ever and always, nihil in intellectus est nisi prius in sensum. Right? So there's nothing in the intellect unless first in the sense. I'm totally Thomistic, right? So in this particular way, right, I am convinced that it comes through the sense we have these individual images inside of us, what St. Thomas called phantasms. But what do we start doing? Well, first of all, we make a map. So we have this organizing principle for the question where. And we start saying, okay, we might not know north, south, east, and west yet, but we know that this is to the right of that, and this is to the left of that, and we start looking at this thing, and we start positioning things in relation to other things. All of the words that express relations only make sense when I've related things to other things according to location. I can't picture anything. There's no picture thing for the where things because they're things in relation to other things according to location. But just hold on to that for a minute. Like a clock. I answer the question when by looking at the relation of one time, one position of the sun to another position of the sun, one position of the hourglass to another position of the hourglass. But they're all relational things. So I'm constantly putting together these devices to relate, right? And then, of course, I start asking the question, what? Right? I'm not asking for the name of the thing. That's an elephant, right? That's a dog. I mean, the word dog means nothing. The word elephant. When does it mean something? When I see elephants in relation to other animals. When I see elephants in relation to non-living things. When I see elephants in relationship to plants. And then I can isolate similarities and differences. Hold on to those words for just a moment. But I'm relating things according to similarities and differences. And then I ask the question, why? Where I'm relating things according to cause and effect. Cause and effect, conditioned and conditions, right? So forth and so on. Okay, now, here's the problem, everyone. And it's the problem recognized by everyone from Plato. And by the way, this is not just Catholic philosophers. Immanuel Kant totally recognized this problem. Alfred North Whitehead totally recognized this problem, right? Michael Polanyi totally recognizes this problem, right? So you don't have to be a Catholic philosopher to get the problem. The problem is, in order to relate one thing to another, I have to have some kind of a superstructure in which to relate them. If I don't have a mental map, I'm sorry, I can't relate this to that in terms of location. If I don't have a mental image for how to relate moments in time to one another, forget it. I'm never going to get any of those relations. If I have no idea of what similarity means, if I have no idea of what difference means, I can't relate them to one another. Here's the problem. Where did you get all of those higher ideas that we call heuristic notions? Heuristic notions are the notions that enable us to relate ideas to one another. Where in the world did I get those heuristic notions from? And of course, the ultimate heuristic notions are who, what, where, why, how, when, etc. Okay? I got it. So the key thing of how much?
You're over time.
I'm over time. Okay. All right. Here's what I'm just going to wrap up. Sorry, I didn't catch the first one. I'll just simply say this as a wrap up. I mean, we don't know where we get heuristic notions from. All we know is these are already packaged ideas, highly abstract relational ideas needed to abstract any other relational idea, and we have it already in our brain. You tell me where I got that package of relational idea of heuristic notions so I could abstract relational ideas. I mean, it didn't come from out there because I'd have to use them in order to abstract them from out there, which means I'd have to have them before I had them in order to use them to get them. Okay? So to make a long story short, I just leave you with this point. I mean, if we take a look at this evidence for conceptual ideas, if we look at the evidence, Girdle's theorem for mathematical notions, which still doesn't explain, human intellection can do far more than any artificial intelligence. Indeed, human intellection never has to make recourse to previous sets of algorithms. All computers do. We're completely unlike that. Our mathematics is completely, as it were, relational, and we grasp the whole of mathematical intelligibility. Put all these things together. These are clues, including our self-consciousness, what David Chalmers contemporarily calls the hard problem of consciousness, where we can experience ourselves experiencing, and we can grasp ourselves grasping, where we're aware of ourselves, or where we are aware of our own awareness. All of these things are just impossible to explain in normal physical processes. Contemporary authors are admitting these things right now. There has to be some transphysical element to come up with conceptual ideas, to come up with heuristic notions, to transcend Girdle's theorem, to get to experiencing of experiencing or awareness of awareness, which transcends physical processes, to get to the point of the transcendental awareness that's necessary for transcendental desire, that makes us creative, that I called God's presence to us, to explain the near-death experiences which point to a transphysical soul capable of surviving bodily death. At the end of the day, I leave you with this one comment. If we don't have a soul, we are completely inexplicable. But if we do have a soul, we're not only explicable, but we're transphysical and we're transcendental. And that's, I think, what happened in the explosion of communication 70,000 years ago. Thank you so very, very much for your kind attention.